Humans have spent quite a bit of time on the planet. While our presence has not always had a net positive effect on the planet, you might be shocked to hear that scientists just discovered a new human species. And that is not even the best part, as the discovery challenges everything we know about our origin. What is the new human species and why is it causing so much excitement among scientists? Stay tuned as we bring you the inside story of the newly discovered human species that raises doubt about our origin. It is common knowledge that present-day humans belong to the Homo sapiens species. What is not commonly known, however, is how Homo sapiens appeared on the scene. The long evolutionary path that led to modern humans began with a single step, or more precisely with the capacity to walk on two legs. Sahelanthropus, one of our earliest known ancestors, began the long transition from ape-like mobility about 6 million years ago, but Homo sapiens would not appear for another 5 million years. During that time, various human species lived, evolved, and died out, intermingling and sometimes interbreeding along the way. Their bodies evolved with time, as did their brains and ability to think, as evidenced by their tools and technologies. Scientists are unearthing ancient bones and stone tools, digging into our genes and recreating the changing environments that helped shape our ancestors' world and guide their evolution. To better understand how Homo sapiens evolved from these older lineages of hominins, which include modern humans and our closest extinct relatives and ancestors. These lines of evidence point to the origin of Homo sapiens in Africa, though not necessarily at a particular time and place. Instead, it appears that distinct groups of human ancestors evolved physically and culturally in relative isolation until climate-driven changes to African terrain prompted them to occasionally mix and trade everything from genes to tool methods. This approach eventually resulted in the distinct genetic makeup of modern humans. Surprisingly, it is genes rather than fossils that can help us trace the migrations, movements, and evolution of our own species, as well as those from which we descended or interbred over time. The oldest recovered DNA of an early human ancestor was discovered in Cima de los Huesos, often known as the Pit of Bones. Thousands of teeth and bones from 28 different people were discovered at the bottom of a cave in Spain's Atapuerca Mountains by experts. Scientists painstakingly extracted the partial DNA from these 430,000-year-old remains in 2016, revealing that the humans in the pit are the oldest known Neanderthals, our most successful and familiar close relatives. The researchers believe that a common ancestor lived between 550,000 and 750,000 years ago. Though our genes definitely demonstrate that contemporary humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, a mysterious hominid species that left significant traces in our DNA but only a handful of tooth and bone remains, do have a common ancestor. However, it's unclear who it was. A frequent contender is Homo heidelbergensis, a species that lived between 200,000 and 700,000 years ago. This species' African family tree appears to lead to Homo sapiens, whereas a European branch leads to Homo neanderthalensis and the Denisovans. More ancient DNA could help provide a more complete picture, but finding it is not guaranteed. Unfortunately, the cold, dry, and stable conditions required for long-term preservation are not typical in Africa, and just a few ancient African human genomes older than 10,000 years have been sequenced. Fossils frequently have a combination of modern and primitive traits that do not evolve consistently towards our current anatomy. Instead, certain traits appear to alter in different places and eras, implying that discrete clusters of anatomical development would have generated humans with very diverse appearances. The bones of 5 individuals discovered in Jebel Ahoud show elements of a modern-looking face coupled with signs of more archaic humans, such as an extended brain case. The existence of human remains in the northwestern region of Africa is proof of how broadly spread people were across Africa even at this early era, not of our genesis site. Other very old Homo sapien fossils are from Florisbad, South Africa, about 260,000 years old, and the Kibish Formation along Ethiopia's Omo River, approximately 195,000 years old. And because of small morphological variations, notably bigger stature, the 160,000-year-old skulls of two adults and a child found in Herto, Ethiopia, were classified as Homo sapiens idaltu. They are, however, so similar to modern humans that some believe they aren't really a subspecies. A Homo sapiens skull unearthed in Engoloba, Tanzania depicts a 120,000-year-old individual with a mix of archaic and more contemporary traits such as lower facial features and a more decreased brow. Given the discrepancies, researchers frequently disagree on which fossil remains constitute modern people, so much so that some attempt to simplify the classification by lumping them all together into a single heterogeneous group. Now, according to the evidence, some 300,000 years ago, African material culture shifted from clumsy, portable stone tools to the more polished blades and projectile points known as Middle Stone Age toolkits. So when did fossils first display completely modern humans with all of their distinguishing characteristics? At 195,000 years old, one Homo kibish skull resembles a contemporary human, whereas another recovered in Nigeria's Iwu Eluru cave appears highly archaic but is only 13,000 years old. These differences show that the process was not linear, with a single point at which all people became modern humans. Our ancestors used stone tools as early as 3.3 million years ago, and by 1.75 million years ago, they adopted the Acheulean culture, a collection of hefty hand axes and other cutting instruments that lasted about 1.5 million years. Thrusting spears employed in the hunt for huge game in what is now Germany were cutting-edge technology only 400,000 years ago. However, they could only be used up close, which was a clear and occasionally dangerous limitation. Even as they developed the more sophisticated anatomy observed in living people, our forefathers' means of life and the tools they made evolved. Humans advanced in tool technology around 300,000 years ago when they created finely crafted implements with flaking points and attached them to handles and spear shafts to considerably improve hunting prowess. Projectile points like those discovered in southern Kenya and dated to 298,000 to 320,000 years ago were an innovation that made it easy to kill any sort of elusive or deadly animals. It ultimately changed how these earliest sapiens interacted with their ecosystems and with other people. Around this time, scrapers and awls arose which could be used to work animal hides for clothing as well as shave wood and other materials. Barbed points made of bone, such as those unearthed in Katanga, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, were used to spear fish at least 90,000 years ago. And these tool improvements, like fossils, emerge in diverse places and times, implying that distinct groups of people evolved and perhaps shared this tool technology. Other humans who are not descended from us may be included in these groups. A collection of complex stone blades discovered near Chennai, India, was dated to at least 250,000 years ago. The emergence of this toolkit in India so soon after the appearance of modern humans in Africa suggests that other species may have independently evolved it, or that some modern humans spread the technology by leaving Africa earlier than most current thinking suggests. Many genetic studies tracing our ancestors back to Africa show that Homo sapiens evolved on that continent. However, it appears that we had a much earlier urge to roam than scientists had previously assumed. And separately, a jawbone discovered inside a collapsed cave on the slopes of Mount Carmel in Israel suggests that modern people lived there between 177,000 and 194,000 years ago along the Mediterranean. Mislier Cave's jaw and teeth are not only unmistakably comparable to those seen in modern humans, but they were discovered using advanced hand axes and flint tools. Other discoveries in the region, including 3 persons in Kafsa, Israel, are later in date. They date from 100,000 to 130,000 years ago, indicating that humans have been present in the area for a long time. Human remains were discovered alongside red ochre and ochre-stained implements at Kafsa, which has been interpreted as the oldest purposeful human burial. More evidence from 80,000 to 120,000 years ago has been discovered in southern China's limestone cave systems. A 100,000-year-old jawbone from Jirandong retains certain archaic characteristics, such as a less pronounced chin, but otherwise appears so modern that it may represent Homo sapiens. A cave in Daoshan contained an astonishing array of ancient teeth that were barely recognizable from our own, implying that Homo sapien populations were already living far from Africa between 80,000 and 120,000 years ago. And even older migrations are possible. Some believe people arrived in Europe as early as 210,000 years ago. And while most early human discoveries stir some scholarly dispute, few compare to the Apodema skull fragment unearthed in southern Greece, which may be more than 200,000 years old and may be the earliest modern human fossil identified outside of Africa. However, the site is fraught with dispute, with some academics suggesting that the poorly preserved remains resemble those of Neanderthals, whose remains were discovered just a few feet away in the same cave. Others question the accuracy of the site's dating analysis, which is admittedly difficult because the fossils have long since fallen out of the geological layers in which they were placed. Now, while many tribes of humans lived outside of Africa during this time period, they are ultimately unrelated to our own evolutionary journey. Genetic analysis can tell which groups of people were our distant ancestors and which had progeny who died out. According to multiple DNA tests released in recent years, all living non-Africans, from Europeans to Australia's Aboriginal people, can trace the majority of their lineage to humans who were part of a historic migration out of Africa that began approximately 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. And this is supported by climate reconstructions that indicate that lower sea levels provided many opportunities for humans to depart Africa for the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East, including one around 55,000 years ago. While earlier African emigrants to the Middle East or China may have interbred with some of the more archaic hominids still alive at the time, their lineage appears to have faded away or been wiped out by the later migration. However, Homo sapiens were not the only humans on this planet throughout most of our existence. We coexisted and, as our genomes show, frequently interbred with other hominin species, including ones we have yet to identify. But one by one they vanished, leaving only our species to symbolize all humanity. Some of these species, though, have only recently perished on an evolutionary timeline. Fossils discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores reveal a fascinating and smaller early human species dubbed Hobbit. Homo floresiensis appears to have existed until about 50,000 years ago, but what happened to them is unknown. They do not appear to be related to modern humans, including the Rampasasa pygmy population who live in the same area today. Neanderthals formerly roamed Eurasia from Portugal and the British Isles all the way to Siberia. As Homo sapiens became increasingly common in these locations, the Neanderthals fell into obscurity, becoming extinct around 40,000 years ago. However, some evidence implies that a few zealots may have persisted in strongholds like Gibraltar until 29,000 years ago, and traces of them can still be found today because modern humans have Neanderthal DNA in their genome. However, the Denisovans, our more mysterious cousins, left so few identifying fossils that scientists aren't sure what they looked like or if they were more than one species. A recent analysis of human genomes in Papua New Guinea implies that humans may have coexisted and interbred with Denisovans as recently as 15,000 years ago, albeit the assertions remain debatable. Their genetic ancestors, however, are more certain. Many current Asians got between 3 and 5% of their DNA from Denisovans. And so, depending on how you look at it, the discovery of a new human species can be the missing piece or make things more complicated when tracing our ancestry. But one thing that is certain is that the discovery of the Dragon Man skull could shake up the human family tree. The astonishingly complete cranium, which has been hidden down a well for decades, has sparked debate over the growing number of fossils that do not easily fit into the standard human origin account. The unusual skull first appeared in the early 1930s, just after the Japanese invaded northeast China. A group of locals were constructing a bridge near Harbin, China's northernmost province, when one of the workers discovered a surprise in the river muck. The virtually complete human skull featured an enlarged cranium from which a hefty brow bone protruded, concealing the gaping holes where eyes once were. And then there's the extraordinary size of the skull. It's enormous. And perhaps cognizant of the significance of the discovery, the man hid the skull in an abandoned well. A study published in the journal The Innovation about 90 years later makes the case that this skull represents a new human species, Homo longi, or the Dragon Man. Two more investigations show that the cranium was most likely from a guy who died at least 146,000 years ago. Its mix of ancient and modern anatomical traits suggest a unique position on the human family tree. Based on the shape and size of the Harbin skull as it's well known and comparisons to other known fossils, the researchers believe it's closely related to many other intriguing human remains discovered in Asia at the same time period. According to the researchers' findings, all of these fossils are connected to our species, possibly even more so than Neanderthals. Nonetheless, the suggested grouping and species identification is causing consternation among scientists. Some scholars believe that the dragon man has ties to the enigmatic Denisovans, a sibling group of the Neanderthals with meager fossil remains, a few teeth, a fragmented piece of skull, a pinky bone, and possibly a damaged jaw. The skull emphasizes how twisted the branches of the human family tree are, and how understanding the broad range of mysterious human forebears and their shifting distribution over time could help us decipher our own beginnings. Before his death, the worker who discovered the skull revealed his long-held secret to his grandchildren, who returned to the well in 2018 to reclaim their reward. Shang Ji, a paleontologist at Hebei Geo University in China who led the current study, heard about the discovery and decided to investigate. Unsure of its meaning, he snapped a photo to show others. The fossil was not only extraordinarily well preserved, but it also had that unusual jumble of traits. The Harbin skull is squat and broad, with a high forehead characteristic of archaic hominins. Only one tooth survives in the jawless cranium, but it has 3 roots, a rare feature in modern people. Other characteristics, however, like its delicate cheekbones that rest flat and low on the face, are more akin to our own species. The family was persuaded to donate the specimen to Hebei Geo University's Geoscience Museum, and the team went to work. They gathered data from 95 fossil crania, jawbones, and teeth representing several hominid groups, characterizing over 600 characteristics. They then utilized a supercomputer to build billions of phylogenetic trees, which are used to provide light on the evolutionary links between hominins with the fewest evolutionary steps, which most experts think is the most likely scenario. The Harbin skull was placed on a new branch that is closely connected to our own species by the tree that sprouted. Some of the researchers believe that the Harbin cranium was so distinct from other human fossils that it should be classified as a distinct species. Ni, an author on the third research defining the new species, lists the characteristics that define the dragon man as a whole: extraordinarily square eye openings, a long and low brain case, the absence of a ridge along the midline of the skull, and more. However, not all scientists and outside specialists agree that the dragon man is a distinct species, nor do they agree on its place on the human family tree. According to Buck of Liverpool John Moores University, many of the skull's distinguishing features appear to be matters of scale rather than separate features. She expects some variance even within a species. Differences in sex, individual age, geographical adaptations, fossil age, and other factors can all contribute to minor individual differences. So what was the dragon man if not its own species? Stringer points to a similar mix of modern and more ancient traits in the Dali cranium, which was classified in the same group as the Harbin skull in the latest study. This skull, discovered in Shaanxi province in northwest China, is considered a separate species of Homo daliensis. And then there are the enigmatic Denisovans. Though not legally recognized as a species, this group is thought to have lived in Asia for tens of thousands of years, and several Asian fossils have been identified as members. However, because scientists have only discovered scant fossil evidence of their existence, genetic confirmation is required, and DNA preservation becomes increasingly unlikely with older fossils. However, scientists went on to announce the finding of a shattered jaw on the Tibetan plateau that was most likely from a Denisovan, making the bone the first fossil of these ancient humans discovered outside of the cave that gave the group its name. According to the newly hypothesized phylogenetic tree, the dragon man is most closely connected to this jaw, known as the Shaho mandible. According to these findings, the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Denisovans split from Homo sapiens ancestors around 600,000 years ago. That ancestor then separated into 2 groups, with Neanderthals spreading across Europe and the Middle East, and Denisovans spreading into Asia. However, all of these groups' ties are bound to be close and difficult to resolve. But more evidence could be on the way. According to Ni, the team engaged in the new article is investigating the feasibility of genetic analysis on the Dragon Man. However, they are proceeding with caution because such a study would necessitate the destruction of small samples of the fossil. Whether or not Dragon Man is a new species, its superbly preserved traits serve as a reminder that nature rarely draws within the lines, and that classification will only become more difficult as new discoveries emerge. The Dragon Man offers intriguing possibilities. The precise site where the laborer took it from the muck is unclear, but the potential place is unusually far north. According to Michael Petralia, a paleoanthropologist at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, who was not involved in the study. Even with today's mild weather, winter temperatures in this location can drop into the single digits in degrees Fahrenheit. 146,000 years ago, it probably wasn't much warmer. The researchers believe that some of the skull's tough characteristics are adaptations to a much colder climate. According to Petralia, the environment may have also isolated the Dragon Man and its kin from other hominins, which may have contributed to some of the peculiarities evident in the fossil today. Stringer said the team's whole database and detailed photos of the Dragon Man are now public, allowing other researchers to delve into the hominin's depths. Many appear to be eager to do so. Also intriguing is the discovery of the ancient remains of early humans in Israel. Excavations at the Israeli site of Nesher Ramla have yielded a skull that could be a late surviving specimen of a separate Homo population that lived in and around modern-day Israel between 420,000 and 120,000 years ago. This early human population swapped both culture and DNA with surrounding Homo sapien groups for thousands of years, as researchers Israel Hershkovitz, Yossi Zeidner, and colleagues reveal in two related papers published recently in Science. A virtually entire mandible or jaw and a right parietal towards the back side of the skull were dated to 140,000 to 120,000 years old, with the study revealing that the person it belonged to wasn't fully Homo sapiens. They were also not Neanderthals, the only other type of person considered to have lived in the area at the time. Instead, this person sits squarely in the center of a hitherto unknown group of Homo. The researchers discovered that the parietal bone exhibited archaic features that are significantly distinct from both early and current Homo sapiens through comprehensive comparison with many other fossil human heads. Furthermore, the bone is far thicker than that of Neanderthals and other early Homo sapiens. The jaw too has archaic traits, but it also has shapes observed in Neanderthals. The bones demonstrate a peculiar blend of archaic and Neanderthal traits that distinguishes early Homo sapiens from later Neanderthals. In contrast to their earlier Neanderthal or Homo sapiens designation, the authors propose that fossils discovered at other Israeli sites, including the famed Lady of Tabun, may also be part of this new human group. The Lady of Tabun, also known as Tabun C1, was discovered in 1932 by archaeologist Yusra and her field director Dorothy Garrod. This fascinating specimen was extensively investigated and taught us a lot about Neanderthal anatomy and behavior at a period when very little was known about our enigmatic evolutionary ancestors. If Tabun C1 and others from the Qesem and Zutiye caves were actually members of the Nesher Ramla Homo group, this reanalysis would explain some previously observed inconsistencies in their anatomy. The enigmatic Nesher Ramla Homo could potentially be our most recent common ancestor with Neanderthals. Its genomic evidence suggests that early gene flow between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals happened between 400,000 and 200,000 years ago. In other words, interbreeding among Homo populations was more widespread than previously imagined. However, even more perplexing, the scientists discovered 6,000 stone tools at the Nesher Ramla site. These tools were created in the same way that contemporaneous Homo sapiens groups created their technology, with such striking similarities that it suggests that two populations, Nesher Ramla Homo and Homo sapiens, were socializing on a regular basis. It appears that they were not only swapping genes but also ideas on toolmaking. The facility also produced bones from animals that were caught, killed, and consumed on site. These discoveries suggest that Nesher Ramla Homo hunted a variety of animals, including tortoise, gazelle, aurochs, boar, and ostrich. Furthermore, they were cooking their meals using fire, as evidenced by the discovery of a campfire feature that was the same age as the fossils. Indeed, the Neshoramla Homo were not only gathering wood for campfires and cooking, but they're also actively managing their fires just like we do now. While the oldest evidence of regulated use of fire is far older, possibly 1 million years ago, the remarkable thing about this specific campfire is the evidence that Neshoramla people tended to it as meticulously as modern Homo sapiens and Neanderthals tended to their own flames. The fact that the campfire feature survived intact outside of a sheltered underground habitat for so long is really astounding. It is currently the oldest intact campfire ever discovered in the wild. What do you think of these newly discovered species? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments section below.